Thank you for listening to this recent message from the Rescue Church. We pray that God will use this message to encourage, challenge, and inspire you on your faith journey. If you'd like to learn more about the Rescue Church, please visit us online at therescuechurch.com.
So I want to start by talking about a couple things that have been going on just kind of in my mind and in my life, and be a little bit transparent if that's okay. Lately there's been a lot of weight that I've personally been feeling, and I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I'm just going to share with you some of the things I've been thinking and some of the things I've been feeling. While some of it is related to church and really wanting to see us truly impact our communities and see people's lives change and see people come to Christ, and looking and going, man, why haven't we seen more people give their lives to the Lord in recent weeks and months? And why haven't we seen more baptisms in recent weeks and months? Well, some of that's been on my mind. There's also been other things, and to be transparent without too many details, even on my other job on the insurance side, some things have been extremely challenging lately. We've had significant obstacles, I'll just say it that way, that have made things extremely difficult and challenging. And unfortunately, like often happens, stuff that was outside of my control as a leader. And so it's just been kind of overwhelming and trying to figure out, how do you fix it? Can you fix it? And to a point where you're going, God, I need a miracle for some of this thing to work out. And then on top of that, there's been some challenges and things going on where just in my family, not just in my immediate family. Honestly, God's been good. My kids are healthy and all, but just more an extended family. This is a little tougher because my dad's here, so hopefully I don't get too emotional. But over about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And so as I've seen him be strong through that and seen what that's looked like in his life, just wishing that you could do something to fix it, but knowing you can't. But at the same time, I've seen God answer prayer, and that the treatment that my dad's on, they told us they hoped it would last for a year, and we're going on 2.5 years, and the doctor said, man, I've never seen this before. And he's been very positive about that, and so that's been awesome, and God's really worked. But I still hate to see my dad or my parents suffering and having to deal with that. So that's just been in my head. And Dad, I don't want you to feel any weight for that. I got a ton of love and all for you. So, and I probably wouldn't have put that example there if I'd known he'd been here, because I would have known it would have made me emotional. All right. So those are a couple things that have been on my mind and things that just kind of weighing on me. But then I look back at the past and some of the challenges I've been through. Back in 2000, I got laid off from my job. And it was crazy because my team was excelling. We were making the company a lot of money. I'd been nominated for awards. I'd made some great bonus money because of how well we had done. And yet I got laid off unexpectedly. But yet as that went on, I applied for a lot of jobs, turned in resumes, had offers. But the crazy thing was, the company that laid me off came back to me, brought me on, offered me an apology because they had made some assumptions that were incorrect. And not only did they offer me that job and apology, they put other offers and opportunities out there that I couldn't have imagined. And those opportunities that they put out there and those things that they did led to new opportunities with other companies and other things, to where I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today if it hadn't been for what happened then. And so you go, okay, God, I can see how you work through that. I can see how, looking back on a struggle about 18 years ago, when Eve and I were deciding we were going to have kids. And we struggled for 2.5 years to get pregnant. We listened to a doctor tell us that there's a 50-50 chance that it's not going to happen. And if any of you are in that situation, I can tell you the things not to say to your wife, because I probably said most of them. And you can ask her about that, and she will validate that I said things that I should not have said. But in that time, we had conversations about a lot of things, and including adoption was one of the conversations that we had. And how yes, we did want to adopt, but that wasn't the time. And out of that trial and that challenge, we end up with a beautiful 15-year-old daughter who I thank God for. And then we get another son after that. And then after that, we end up being able to adopt our third child, Kirti. And God's been just so good with that. So I can look how God brought us through that. And even while I mentioned the adoption, for those of you, I won't give you the whole adoption story, but we went from saying, no, we're never going to adopt from India, to, crap, God, I guess we are adopting from India, to that door closing, and that's going, okay, that door closed, and now it's open. And then, so we're saying, yes, we are adopting. That process took 3 years, and a variety of things happened, including a phone call from my wife in tears after she had gotten a call from our adoption agency saying, you need to provide $15,000 or they're going to give Kirti to somebody else. And so there was all these emotional roller coasters and things that went along with it. But like I said, I have a beautiful 11-year-old daughter who fits very well in our family and has a ton of attitude and has just kind of completed, at least for the time being, our family. And no, that's not an announcement. I've learned not to say, no, God's not going to do this, because he tends to prove me wrong. And then I continue down the road, and I can look at some things that are related to the church. Even I had plans. So back in the early 2000s, as it was Flandreau Baptist Church, meeting in the extension building and then the school, even I had the opportunity to come over, and so John could have a week off or whatever if he had a weekend come up. Or at one point it was called, hey, I'm stuck in a blizzard, can you preach for me today, kind of deal, or tomorrow. So I had a chance to be a part of that, and we started to say, you know what, we think God's leading us to be a part of Flandreau Baptist Church. And so in 2005, 2006, we said, okay, we think this is where God's leading. Talked to my boss at the time. He had said, you know what, I'll relocate you to South Dakota. It's like, oh, score, that's taken care of. I don't have to worry about the job thing. That's going to happen. And then it was the housing thing. I was like, well, what's that going to look like? We found a house, made an offer, it was accepted. It's like, boom, that's all coming together. We put our house on the market. We're like, God is working all of this out. We are going to South Dakota. We get a chance to be a part of Flandreau Baptist Church. For those of you who don't know, the Rescue Church started out as Flandreau Baptist Church, became Flandreau Bible Church, and is now the Rescue Church. So it is the same church that I'm talking about here. So I thought that was all going to work out, and then the house, something comes together on that offer, then the house that we were going to buy, and that starts falling through. And my boss gets this great promotion, and the guy replacing him says, no, I don't think I'm going to make any changes, so you're not going. And our house doesn't sell. And I remember going, God, I thought you were working all of this out. But then what happened next was, for those of you who know Dave and Holly, John's brother Dave and his wife Holly, they were our closest friends in Minnesota. We used to hang out with them almost nightly. In fact, that's probably not even an exaggeration. And we were going to a hotel, to a water park. I think it was Micah's birthday, or maybe it was Hudson's birthday. I can't remember whose birthday it was, but one of the kids had a birthday, and we were going to play at a water park. And I remember telling Dave and we had told Dave and Holly that it just wasn't working out, that we weren't going to be moving. And I remember Holly, through tears, telling us, you know what? God's, I think, calling us to move. And so what I thought was a door closing and not bringing any additional help and support to John ended up being a door opening for Dave and Holly to come and be a part of taking things to the next level here. And they were key components and key cogs in the Rescue Church for a number of years. And then come 2010, I'm moving. The plan is to go to Yankton. We put offers in on 8 or 9 different places. We had an offer accepted to move into a place in Yankton. The moving truck was supposed to show up the next day, and I get a call from the realtor saying, the guy selling the house changed his mind, and so he's pulling the offer, and I'm, okay, we're supposed to move tomorrow. But through all those closed doors, it ended up that we found a house in Del Rapids, and we did end up at the Rescue Church. Granted, it was 5 years later, but God's timing wasn't our timing, and his plan wasn't our plan. And I can look back and see how he was working and what he was doing, but at the time it didn't make sense. And so today, we're going to take a look at a passage from Matthew 14, 22 to 33. And we're going to see what it looks like to have faith as you go through those journeys, as you go through those storms. And so I'm not sure where you're at today. Some of you I know, but not everybody. I don't know if you're in a situation where everything is great in your life, and if so, that's awesome. I'm glad you're here. I hope that you have something that you take away from this for the future or to help encourage somebody else. For some of you, it's almost great, and so you're in a similar situation. For others of you, it's challenging, and you're going, man, right now I'm facing some challenges, and I hope this encourages you where you're at there. And for others of you, you may be at a place, and in fact, I talked to someone just today who's at a place where life is chewing them up, spitting them out, and they're not sure how they're going to move forward. I don't know where you're at, but my prayer is that God would speak to you, not through my words, but through his words, and that his Holy Spirit would speak to you today. So let's start in prayer here. God, thank you for the privilege of being up front here. I ask that you would use my words. In fact, I ask that wouldn't even be my words, but it would be you speaking through me. And I ask that humbly, just knowing that I cannot communicate, I'm sure, what you need each person to hear. So I ask, God, that you would communicate, that your Spirit would be here with us right now, that whatever you want to say to each individual that's sitting in this room, wherever they're at in life, whatever they're going through, God, that you would speak to them. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, we're going to jump right into Matthew 14, 22 through 33. I'm going to read them. I think they might even be up on the screen because Chris is awesome like that. So we're going to read Matthew 14, 22 to 33. And it says, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake. Back to the other side of the lake while he sent people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting a heavy wave. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you, walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out, grabbed him, and said, "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You truly are the Son of God," they exclaimed. Today we're going to go through four keys to facing the storms and to having faith in the storm. The first one is to finding God in your situation. So the first point I want to make is that we need to find God in the situation. This is the part that jumped out at me, and if you look back at that, it says Jesus insisted that they get into the boat. That's crazy to me. I don't know how many times I've gone through this. I grew up in a Christian home. We were in church. I heard the story numerous times, but it never stuck out to me until 2 weeks ago that Jesus insisted that they get into the boat. He knew that the disciples were getting ready to go into a storm. In fact, Jesus was God. He knew what was coming up. He knew that there was going to be this nasty storm. There was going to be all these waves. He knew that it was going to be scary. And I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, I won't claim to know what God thinks, but did he say, well, maybe this is going to be an opportunity? Did he say, maybe I want to give them something incredible in the middle of this storm? I don't know. All I know is he insisted, knowing what was lying ahead of them, that he send them into the storm. And some of us are in the middle of the storm right now. Maybe that's where you're at. And if so, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not right where God wants you. It may mean that he sent you there for some reason. He sent you down that road for some reason. I don't know what it is, but maybe that's it. Maybe he has an opportunity for you in there. Or maybe he simply just wants you to draw closer to him. I don't claim to have that answer, but I hope that he starts to reveal some of that to you. So he sends them in the storm, and the disciples are freaking out because there's this whole storm thing. But if we look back at Matthew chapter 8, there's a little bit of deja vu, because in Matthew chapter 8, the disciples are out on the lake, and there's another storm. Now this time Jesus is with them, asleep in the boat, but again, they're freaking out and wondering what's going on. And in that time, Jesus gets up, he calms the storm, and everything's good. So I don't know what it's like. I don't know about you, if you've been through some of those storms in the life that you can look back on, but maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you need to look back on some of those situations that you've been through in the past and remember who God is and remember that he's brought you through them before. Maybe that's where you're at. But Jesus was in the storm with them. He talks about them having a little faith. And again, like I said, this was just 6 chapters earlier that he had gone through this. So my question is, do you remember what God's done for you before? Maybe it's something like journaling that you could do, and that's a way for you to start remembering your prayers. Recently, I had somebody reference George Mueller, and if you don't know who he is, I would just encourage you to go look him up. He's an evangelist who ended up leading in an orphanage and starting an orphanage and working with kids. But he wrote down 3,000 journal entries of prayer requests and the answers to those requests. And he could look back on them and be encouraged on how God answered. He could look back at the time where he begged God to provide milk, and for some crazy reason a milk truck stalls in front of the orphanage and they can't get it going. So in order to keep the milk from spoiling, they send it in. Maybe there's some of those things in your life too, where if you would just journal them, you could look back at them and see. Maybe it's a practical step. Maybe you're at a point where you need to borrow faith of others. Maybe you're going, man, I'm in the middle of a storm, and I've never been in anything like this. But maybe you need to borrow the faith of somebody else. Maybe there's someone else who's been through what you're going through. And I'd almost promise you that there is. If it's a marital issue, there's someone that's been there before. If it's a drug issue, there's somebody who's been there before. If it's alcoholism, there's somebody that's been there before. If it's financial, I promise you there's plenty of people that have been there before. If it's losing a business, if it's whatever else it is, there's somebody that's been there before. If it's struggling with parenting, there's somebody that's been there before. Borrow the faith of others. And if you can't find somebody like that, if you don't know who that person is, let me point you to Hebrews chapter 11. And we're not going to read all of that, but it's called the faith chapter. And borrow the faith of those who went on before us. I'll share a couple stories. In Hebrews chapter 11, there's 39 verses that talk about faith. One of those parts talks about Noah, who built an ark because there was a flood coming. And the crazy thing with that is Noah says, okay, God, I'm going to build this ark. He's never seen rain before, yet he believes that God is going to bring rain that's going to flood the earth. That's crazy faith that I can't even imagine. Or there's Sarah, who her and Abram are both beyond childbearing age, but she's told, hey, God's going to give you a child. And yet she had enough faith to believe that God would do it, and he did. There's Moses, and actually I'm going to go to Moses' parents that are referenced here, who they were concerned they were going to lose their child because all of the Hebrew children were being killed. And by faith it says that they took Moses, they put him in the reeds, and God brought a princess to come and take care of their child and take care of Moses. Or there's the story of Jericho, where the people are told for 7 days to march around Jericho, and the walls will come tumbling down. And I don't remember who it was, if it was Scott. I think it was Scott was going to start singing Zacchaeus. I could start singing here, but I'm being recorded, so I won't. But yeah, Joshua fought that battle in Jericho, but really God is the one that made it happen. The list keeps going, but there's some stories that you can go back to, hopefully, for your later reading. And as we're looking back, let's take a look back here at the Rescue Church. I mentioned that I've had a chance to be connected in some way for more than 10 years here at the Rescue Church. And we can look at some things that have happened. We can look at the planting of this church and some of the challenges that John faced. In fact, we can look at the faith that John had and Jess had as they gave up their jobs and went out as missionaries to come to this little town in South Dakota, and how God provided and brought them through that. We can look at moving into the different buildings and the circumstances around that. In fact, even to the building that we're sitting in right now, and how when they were trying to find a place to meet, door after door kept closing, and they're like, we can't find a building, and yet God provided this building here. We can look at the vision for multi-site and say, when John brought that up to us in late 2009, early 2010, and said, hey, I've got a vision that I know God put on my heart that we're going to reach rural communities with technology, but I don't know what it looks like, and how far we've come. We've got people who have given their lives to the Lord through other campuses other than this that came out of faith. We've got people who've been baptized because of this. Jana mentioned it. We've got families that we've helped feed in D-side Jamaica because of how God has worked through the people of the Rescue Church and through that vision. We've got how we got to a point where then when Tyler, we bring on this young kid in Tyler Ramsby, and he comes in and he serves, and he says, I think God's calling me to plant a campus in Garrettson, and he does, and God blesses it. And don't get me wrong, there was challenges financially trying to figure out how is God going to provide. And by faith, we stepped out and said, we know that that's who God has there, so by faith, we're going to pay Tyler to be the pastor there. And we did, and the crazy thing is, God provided, and people came to Christ. And right now, there's a healthy church in Garrettson because of people stepping out in faith. We can look back and see how God's provided, but sometimes we just need to look back and see what God's done and draw on that. What would have been different if those disciples had looked back to Matthew chapter 8, and I don't know how many days that was, but it was only 6 chapters. It doesn't take that long to read, so it couldn't have been that long before. And look back and say, okay, he's brought us through this time, he can bring us through again. And while I'm slamming on the disciples a little bit, it always boggles my mind that you have the feeding of the 5,000, and they're like, God, how are you going to provide? Jesus, how are you going to do this? He feeds 5,000 people. Then not even a chapter later, depending on where you're reading, they go to him when there's 4,000 people, and they go, God, I don't see how this is going to work. Jesus, what are we going to do with these people? I hope we're not so short-sighted that we forget what God's done because we get so overwhelmed with the challenges that we're facing today. And if that's where you're at, take a minute and look back at what God's done, reflect on that, and be encouraged. All right, sometimes we have to take steps of faith in order to see God show up. In Matthew 6:48, it's a parallel text to this one in in Mark 6:48. It's a parallel text to this one in Matthew. And so let me take a step back from that. If you're not familiar with how the Gospels are, you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they all tell similar stories about the life of Jesus, but from different perspectives of different people. And so this one here is from Mark. The one we were talking about was from Matthew. This one's from Mark. And in it says that Jesus saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard, struggling against the wind and waves. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning that Jesus came towards them, walking on the water, and he intended to go past them. I look at that and I go, I wonder why. And I don't have the answer. I'm not going to claim to be a theologian, but it just kind of seemed interesting to me that Jesus intended to walk on by. And sometimes there's things that we don't get. Like, for example, why was Jesus walking on the water? If Jesus can walk on water, why wasn't he Superman flying from one side to the other? Why didn't he teleport himself from one place to the other? I don't know the answer. Like I said, I don't have it. But for some reason, Jesus decided he was going to go through a stroll through the water, or not through the water even, on top of the water in a lightning storm. And any of us that have had kids or have been kids, which is all of us, have been told, you stay out of the water in a storm. But that Jesus is walking on the water. And as he's walking on the water, intending to pass by, the disciples saw him. So what I thought as I hear that and as I think about that is, they couldn't have been just simply focused on the boat and where they were at. They must have been looking. And I don't know what they were looking for. I don't know why they were looking out. Who knows? Maybe they were hoping. Maybe they were remembering the storm before, going, man, if Jesus would just show up now, he could calm this down. I don't know. But they were looking out, and they saw him as he intended to walk by. I want to encourage you, don't focus on the problem that you're in. Don't lose sight of everything else around you, because you're so super laser focused on what's going wrong in your life. Because you're going to miss what's out there. You may not see Jesus. If you focus on the storm, you may not see the God that wants to help you bring through the storm. Help bring you through the storm. As people are in a storm, sometimes we feel like we're all alone. I want to encourage you that you're not alone. Like I said, there's people that you can talk to that have been through these things before. Jesus, the disciples didn't know where Jesus was at, but he did come walking to them. I promise you that even if you may not see Jesus, even if you don't know where he's at right now, if he's there. If you have a personal relationship with Jesus, we're told that he won't ever leave us or forsake us. And so I want to encourage you that Jesus is there with you, even in the middle of your storm. So, anyway, as we're in the storm and dealing with things like that, we look at Peter's life here, and it says that Peter looks out at Jesus and says, tell me what to do. And maybe that's where we're at, but tell me what to do. Peter wanted to be where Jesus was at. He wanted to know what Jesus wanted from him. And then when he says to Jesus, if it's you, call me. I want to walk out to you. And so Jesus calls him and says to go out of the boat and walk to him. And as he followed God's call, he takes a step, and he takes another step, and he starts walking towards Jesus. I wonder what the other disciples thought at that point. I wonder if they're kicking themselves going, man, we're idiots. Why aren't we walking on the water? Or what their thought was. Were they thinking, oh, he's going to sink. He's going to screw up again. And here's Peter, who's always so arrogant and always cocky. He's going to sink. I don't know what they were thinking. But the interesting thing is they didn't seek to go where Jesus was at. It was Peter that said, hey, I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to go to where Jesus is at. It was Peter who's had a privilege that none of us have had of walking on water. Interesting side note that's not in my notes. So a few years ago now, I mentioned that I heard Chase preach on this topic, and that's what jumped out at me. A few years ago, Chase had this brilliant idea, and I love Chase, and I love how he connected with kids and with teens and all sorts of things. But I remember when Chase had this brilliant idea that he was going to create this illusion of walking on water. And so he had arranged these little pools and had arranged that he had some trickery that would make it the illusion of walking on water. It didn't work. He fell in. The point is, even when we try and do it and fake it, it still doesn't always work. So walking on water, I don't know too many people who have done it, yet Peter stepped out in faith, walked on water. And now, for us, what's that step that we need to take? Sometimes it feels really comfortable in the boat. Those other disciples were in the middle of the same storm that Peter was, but I don't think for 1 second they probably thought, hey, it's a good idea to get out of the boat and walk to Jesus. They were focused on where they were at. They were solidly there, and I'm making that assumption just based on the fact that it was none of them that said, hey, Jesus, let me walk on the water. Sometimes it's because it's familiar. I mean, these were fishermen, many of them, so they were comfortable. They maybe thought, hey, this boat's going to take us through this. We're going to get through it. And maybe it was the fear of the unknown. It was we don't know what's coming next. And so that's why we'll stay here. I don't know what was keeping them in the boat, but I know that they took that step of faith. I know that I mentioned earlier, my family did that step of faith as we chose to move into adoption or as we chose to move to South Dakota. I know at the Rescue Church, we took steps of faith when we stepped out to buy this building, which wasn't terribly expensive, but when you have next to zero money, anything is expensive. Or when John and Jess moved to South Dakota, or when Chase and Jacqueline moved to South Dakota and came knowing that there wasn't a full salary. Sometimes we take that step of faith going, I don't know, God, how you're going to provide, but I'm going to trust that you're going to. And side note to that, we're thrilled that Chase and Jacqueline came. We miss them terribly, but we're thrilled that they left Jack and Deb behind because we love having Jack and Deb here. So we're super thankful for that as well. So anyway, so for Peter to experience this miracle, he had to say, okay, I'm going to take this step. I'm going to get out of the boat, and I'm going to start walking. Would I rather look back and say, I tried and failed, or that I made that step of faith and yet found out that wasn't the direction God wanted? Or do I want to get to the end of my life and look back and go, I wish I had followed. I wish I had stepped out on faith. We're all at different points in our lives, so I don't know where you're at. But maybe you're looking at something where you know that there's a risk out there. You think that God's leading you in that direction. You feel that nudge. Maybe it's time for you to take that step out of the boat. Maybe it's time for you to step out in faith so that you don't have to look back at your life later and go, man, I wish I had stepped out. I wish I had gotten out of that boat. I wish I had gotten my feet wet. So, number 2 point I want to make is make sure we're following God's call. Make sure you follow God's call even during the storm. So when Peter saw things started to look at things around him, we're told that he got scared and he starts to sink. Peter saw the storm versus Jesus. He saw what was coming. He saw the waves, and he didn't know how it was going to go. His faith timed out. He got to a point where his faith ended. He couldn't trust. He had faith to get out of the boat. He had faith to take a couple of steps, which is more than the other disciples, but his faith timed out. We're told that he had little faith. I don't know if that means that he didn't have a lot of faith. I don't know if that means that it was just for a short period of time he had faith. As I understand it, that could be translated a couple different ways, but either way, he didn't have faith for the full step out and walk to Jesus. He only had a little faith. I'm reminded of that story in Mark 9 that Kirsten referenced this morning. And it says in Mark 9, 20 through 29, it says, So they brought the boy, but when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion. He fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. How long has this been? Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can. Which, I just pause there. Kudos to this dad, because that had to be extremely hard, because I don't know how old this boy is at the time, but to keep pulling your son out of a fire or out of the water, kudos to this dad for continually fighting for his son. Anyway, it says, well, when he says, have mercy on us and help us if you can. What do you mean if I can? Jesus asked. Anything is possible if a person believes. The father instantly cried out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. Listen, you spirit that make the boy unable to speak or hear and speak, he said. I command you, come out of this child and never enter him again. Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him. The boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, helped him to his feet. He stood up, and afterward, when Jesus was alone with the disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out the evil spirit? Jesus replied, this kind can only be cast out by prayer. I do believe, but help my unbelief. How many of us are where that person is? How many of us are at that spot where we're in the middle of that storm and we know we need to do something? We know that God can, but we're having a hard time believing he will. We believe that God's calling us to, but yet that step out over the side of that boat into the water is scary. I would encourage you, pray like this man did. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. There is absolutely nothing wrong with admitting that your faith is rocked or that your faith is being challenged. There's nothing wrong with that, because we see that God honored this father's prayer and this father's request, and said that he would heal that boy, and did. So the number 3 thing I want to say is that we need to focus on Jesus every step of the way. Don't let your faith time out. Keep focused on him. And then going back to the text in verse 32, it says, when they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. I want to encourage you in this. Whatever part of the storm you're in, wherever you're at, you will get through this. Your storm will end. That's my 4th thing, is the storm will end. I don't know how. I'm not claiming to be able to rub some little lamp and have a genie come out. I'm not even claiming that just because you pray that God's going to be your cosmic genie that's going to fix it all. But at some point, your storm will end, and you will get through whatever you're going through, whatever that looks like in your life. I love how Jesus, in this story, comes to the disciples during the storm. As they're at their worst, and as they're thinking that Jesus is back on the other side and not knowing what's going on, as they're trying to figure out what's going to happen, Jesus comes to them in the storm and calms that storm. I love how he provided an incredible opportunity in the midst of the trouble. There was an opportunity that they wouldn't have had he not sent them into the storm, had he not insisted that they go in that boat. There was an opportunity that they had, and that Peter had, to step out in faith and trust Jesus. I love how he gave them that opportunity. I love that Peter thought, well, if Jesus is out there doing what I want to be doing, that he's going to do everything he can to do that with Jesus. He stepped out in faith in the middle of that opportunity. I love how Jesus was right there when Peter cried for help. It's easy for us to point at Peter and go, see, his faith timed out. He had little faith. He gave up. It's easy for us to see that. But he was the only one that stepped out of the boat. He was the only one that went there. And when he did start to sink, he did cry out. And Jesus didn't say, you know what? Your faith wasn't enough. I'll see you later. No, he reaches down, meets Peter where he's at, and lifts him up and brings him back to the boat. I love those things. And in the end, at the end of it all, the disciples realized who Jesus is. The hero of this story is Jesus. The hero of your story is Jesus. In Matthew 14:33, at the end, it says, then they worshiped him and said, you really are the Son of God. So here's my questions for you. If you're already at a point where you know Jesus and where you have a relationship with him, I promise he's there with you, and he wants you to trust him, and he wants you to look to him in the middle of your storm. But if you're here and you don't know Jesus, then I want to encourage you that there's no time like the present to have a relationship with him. Jesus never promises an easy life, and so I'm not going to stand up here and say, you know what, if you're going through a storm, if you just pray and give your life to Jesus, your life will get easy. That's not how it goes, and I can't find that in the Bible. He doesn't promise that if we have a relationship with him, those cravings for that alcohol or that drug or whatever will go away. He doesn't say that. But he does tell us that he'll be with us. And those disciples realized, as he got back in the boat and calmed the storm, that he truly was the Son of God. So if you're at that point, I want to just tell you, there's no time like the present to have a relationship with him. As we wrap up here, I'm going to ask everybody to bow their heads, and we're going to get closing in prayer here. I want to start by just asking a question, and as everybody's heads are bowed and eyes are closed, I want to, if you would, if you're going through a hard time right now and would like prayer, I'm not going to call you out, but if you want to just slip your hand in the air, I won't call you out, I won't point you out, but if I can pray for you, please, this would be a great time. And like I said, I won't call you out. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I won't call you out. So, God, I lift up these people right now that have admitted that they're in the middle of a hard time. They're in the middle of a storm. I don't know what their situation looks like, but you're God and you do. I don't know if it's a storm that they've gotten into through mistakes that they've made, or if it's a storm that for some reason you've sent them out into for something that you want to do in and through them. Whatever that reason is, God, I ask that you would help them to see you in the middle of this storm, that they would know and experience just your presence in the middle of this storm, that they would have that hope that Scott talked about last week, that they would have that hope that's in you in the middle of what they're going through. God, send your Spirit, please, to minister to them, to comfort them, to encourage them. Let them see you in the middle of their storm. And still, while every head's bowed and every eye's closed, if you're at a point right now where you're saying, man, I've never had that relationship with Jesus. I don't know what that looks like. I just want to encourage you right now to that I would be available and I would be more than willing to have a conversation with you about what it looks like to have a relationship. And if you're saying, no, Sam, I'm there. I know I need to give my life to Jesus. I know that I need to turn to him. I just encourage you right now, slip your hand in the air. I won't call you out. I'll follow up with you later. But if you're at a point right now where you're saying, I'm giving my life to Jesus and I'm doing it today, if you just slip your hand in the air and I'll follow up with you at a later time. And I want to just pray with you as well. All right, let's wrap up in prayer. God, thank you for today. Thank you for the beautiful weather. Thank you for the beautiful people that you've brought out. Thank you for a chance to worship you. Thank you for examples in your word from people that have gone before us, from people who have stepped out in faith before us, from people who have struggled before us. Thank you for those examples. Thank you for what I can learn and what we can all learn as we look at our past and see what you've brought us through. God, help us to have all of our hope and all of our faith in you, the one who can calm the storms, the one who can help us walk on water, the one who loves us and truly is the Son of God. Help us lean into you tonight. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rescue Church Past Messages. To hear our messages live, head to one of our physical campuses or check out our iCampus at therescuechurch.tv.